Okay, chapter 9, section 5. All right. These are the sine and cosine ratios. All right. Fairly simple. We have the same information up top about which is the opposite leg and the adjacent. As long as you identify the hypotenuse, which is always the opposite of the right angle, you should be okay. All right. So we have our triangle here. A little difficult to see because it's a little low right here, but this is our B. Okay. And I want to point out to you something that you should already notice. Traditionally, we call the corner A, the vertex A, and the side that is opposite of it, lowercase a. Okay? Capital B corresponds with lowercase b as a side. All right. So that's generally true for triangles in math, and I thought I would share that with you so you know how the format usually works out. Okay, now, with regards to sine, the sine ratio is a ratio of the opposite leg of an angle divided by the hypotenuse. Now, what that means is that there are two angles, okay, A and B, which means we're going to have two different ratios. It kind of depends on which angle you're coming from. For example, sine A from this corner over here, the opposite leg would be little a, and the hypotenuse would be C. But coming from this corner, this would be the opposite, and this would be the hypotenuse. Okay? So that's why this is written like that. There are two different ways, two different angles, because it depends on which angle you're referring to. Now, regardless of which one you're referring to, sine is always the same. Opposite divided by hypotenuse. The cosine ratio is similar, but instead of the opposite being divided by the hypotenuse, in a cosine, it is the adjacent leg. Okay. Now, one more time. This is the hypotenuse. Regardless of which direction this triangle is going, this is the hypotenuse because that is the opposite of a right angle. Okay. Angle A that has an adjacent leg of B because that's the one that is touching the A. And that's the difference. In this case, A divided by B, excuse me, the cosine of A is B divided by C. The adjacent leg, the one touching it, divided by C. Angle B is from this corner, this is the adjacent leg. So it's A divided by C, all right? Now, the only way you get these wrong is you get them confused, right? And this is why we have this. This is to remind us of the ratios. This is our basic geometric trig functions. We refer to it as SOHCAHTOA, right? And what this is telling us is the sine is the opposite over the hypotenuse. The cosine is adjacent over the hypotenuse. The tangent is opposite over adjacent. If you can remember SOHCAHTOA, you should be able to keep most of those ratios. All right. Now, let's take a look at a couple of examples here. We have given a triangle. They ask us to find the sine and cosine ratios. All right. Now, it depends on what corner you're coming from, so we need to be specific. Coming from the angle P direction, opposite is 77 and adjacent is 36. Okay, and our hypotenuse is 85. Now, what does that mean? It means coming from our P direction, the sine of the angle of P is the ratio 77 divided by 85, opposite over hypotenuse. And the cosine coming from this direction would be the adjacent divided by the hypotenuse. Now, when we put this into a calculator, 77 divided by 85, 36 divided by 85, this is our answer. Okay, this is what we're looking for. And basically, it's just that easy. Now, remember, they want us to find both angles. And so far, we've used sine and cosine just for P. Coming from the other direction, coming from the angle Q direction. This time, our opposite leg is 36. Our adjacent leg is 77. So, when we take the sine of Q, the opposite over the adjacent would be 36 over 85. The adjacent over the hypotenuse is here. All right, and that gives us this decimals. Now, one more thing I want to point out to you if you hadn't already noticed. The cosine from one corner is the sine of the other corner. Okay, That's the relationship between sine and cosine. They're inverse. All right. One more time. The cosine from one corner is the sine coming from the other corner. All right. Now, that might be useful to us. It might not, but that'll help us understand our ratios. Now, we're going to use the same information to find our unknown length. For example, we have a hypotenuse of 6. How do I know that's the hypotenuse? Because it's opposite of the right angle. We have a 40-degree angle here, and we don't know how big this is. All right. Now, what information is given to us? We're given the angle. We're asked to find the opposite side of the angle, and then we're asked to find the hypotenuse. Okay. That is, sine of 40 is the ratio between the opposite and the hypotenuse. Now, in this case, I'm going to have to get the x by itself. Okay. Now, what is the sine of 40? I type that into my calculator, and I get 0.64. So 0.64 is equal to x over 6. Now we solve for x by multiplying both sides by 6, and we find out that x is about 3.86. Okay. Let's go ahead and try some on our own. All right. Let's do 12. Okay, it says find sine D, E, cosine D, cosine E. All right, well, easy enough. Sine of D coming from this corner would be opposite over hypotenuse. It's just that easy. And the cosine of D would be adjacent over the hypotenuse. Okay, now coming from the other corner, remember the sine is going to be the cosine of the other. Coming from the other corner, opposite over adjacent is going to be 9 over 15. And coming from this corner, that's supposed to be E. We still have the same ratios. Okay, that's it. That's all we're asked to do. Okay, it helps us solve problems, okay, by giving us a ratio and connecting the way angles are with the way a triangle is. All right, now let's take this a little step further. All right, now we have two unknowns. We need to find each of those, and we need to use sine and cosine. Okay, now what do they give us? They give us 32 degrees. Should I use sine or cosine? It's kind of a choice, but let's take a look at what we have, okay? If I use sine, that's going to be the opposite over the hypotenuse. All right, and to solve this problem, I'm going to use my calculator to find out how much the sine of 32 is. And the sine of 32 is 0.52999, so I'm going to call it 0.3. All right, next, to solve for the x, I multiply both sides by 18. And when I do that, I find that my x value is 9.54. Okay, this piece right here, 9.54. Okay. Now, we also need to find this piece, the y, which would mean I'm going to need to use the 32, and I need to use the trig function, that is the adjacent divided by the hypotenuse. We know which one that is. That's called the cosine. Okay. And of course, we're going to do something similar by doing the cosine of 32, which is 0.85, we'll call it round up. And we multiply both sides by 18. And when we do that, we find out that 15.2 equals y. All right? And that's how big the other side is. All right. If you have any questions, just go ahead and let me know or let your teacher know. Thank you.